And you can imagine the eggs being laid in a safe position the day before, but now with a 2, 3, 4 foot tide coming in, extending over the nest, approaching the nest, now you lay the next batch of eggs. And then covering some of those, you lay the next, covering more of those, and that is what we're seeing, an elevation.
Well, in this case, it was probably all laid at once.
Okay.
In this case. However, I'm very glad you said that, because that is precisely what we see with dinosaur eggs. Now, in this case, though, before we leave this one, the point I want to make with this is what the dinosaurs want to do.
Yes. All right.
So
well
that's what
stated.
they want to do.
Well stated.
What do we actually find in the fossil record? We find a number of very radical things. For example, this comes from the Two Medicine Formation in Montana. Again, a replica. It was in green-gray mudstone. And again, apparently this dinosaur laid them in twos, but apparently laid the eggs on the run.
Ian, that's incredible.
Why would it want to do that?
Professor? Yes, on the run. Rather than in the oval shape they want to lay them in, on the run, quickly.
Exactly.
Incredible.
So it did not take the time to lay out the nest. It was apparently running from something. At least that could be one interpretation. When you read the original literature, they say that the dinosaur apparently manipulated the eggs after burial. There's no reason to conclude that. I hate to disagree, but this, if they're going to manipulate it, this is most
the way
likely.
they would manipulate it.
And it makes sense. They now sit in the middle and sit there and brood the eggs.
Is it assumed with that mucus-like membranous material between them that perhaps they were both laid simultaneously?
Difficult to say. Some have suggested it was one oviduct. Others have suggested it was probably two. And thus it could lay either one egg at a time or under duress, possibly lay 2 eggs at once, using both oviducts at the same time. But it's speculation.
Certainly.
Nobody really knows. Now, before we get to this one, I would like to jump over to this plaque up here.
We have a lot of information to share.
A lot of information. Now, this way up in here at the top, you'll see this was the fourth model I wanted to bring with me today, which unfortunately, after I had molded it, it fell over in my shop in the middle of the night and destroyed itself.
But you'll be back.
I'll be back. Oh, sure, I'll bring it back. Now, those eggs are huge. They're the size of a basketball.
Like that?
Yes, they're about 25 centimeters in diameter. They were just gargantuan things. They, if you ask me, a quick guess, probably exceeding 50 pounds when they were laid. They're huge eggs. But you'll notice up here that what they assumed was simply that it was multiple years between, or a year between the laying of the first egg and the next 2 eggs. And that was what was originally found. This is from the original drawing from the literature, which was redrawn by Barnhart. And essentially, I agree with his conclusions. You can see the first egg here. This was apparently a cleavage plane in the rock. In other words, a sedimentary layer.
Yes.
And when they opened it up, clearly it is halfway through the 2 eggs, number 2 and 3, and number 1 is barely in the picture. So it was either above or below the eggs. Now, it was unclear which it was. He simply went on the assumption that it was below. So what has happened here, egg number 1 was laid down, some 12 to 15 centimeters of sediments were laid down, and then the next 2 eggs were laid. I'm so glad you said that, rapidly. Why would you say rapidly?
Well, 1 egg is in place. We have a mechanism in process, and the sedimentary layer, with this in place, provides a base for the next egg.
And let's put it another way. Would we really expect that egg to last even 1 year unbroken?
Or a month with the predators around?
No way. It wouldn't. The most logical explanation is these eggs were laid rapidly in rapidly rising mud.
In a desperate context.
Exactly. Again, evidence of catastrophe.
Yes.
Now, let's come back to this nest. And again, this is redrawn by Barnhart. This is straight from the CRSQ article. And you'll notice that, again, it appears the eggs are at different elevations. And what he proposed was that they were laid, number 1, and then as the dinosaur laid its egg, and then laid them again, standing in the middle, laying them in a circle, and the mud was rising continually.
Literally around the feet of the female dinosaur.
Exactly. as it was laying the eggs.
And what type dinosaur? That's a Titanosaurus.
Yes, and thank you. I almost forgot. I'm glad you asked.
Yes.
It is believed to be a hadrosaur.
Okay,
now,
a duckbill type dinosaur.
One of the duckbill types. The reason that's interesting, and I hadn't thought of this until my buddy Vance Nelson and I were discussing this, he saw a picture of the model I sent him, and he asked, is that really the way it was found? I said, well, yeah, that's the way it's in the scientific literature. He made a good point. Now, Vance has gotten to study a number of more dinosaur eggs than I have. I have been able to have the privilege to study a couple of hadrosaur dinosaur egg nests, and I agree with him. Neither of us have ever seen a hadrosaur egg nest in a circle. We've only ever seen them in a big clump of eggs.
All right.
That's the way you find them. So the question arises, is this the way the hadrosaurs really want to lay their eggs and they didn't have time, so they're just dumping them in piles to get rid of them? That would seem to be the conclusion.
Probably so. That's good thinking. And here was some desperation as the sediment was rising around her.
Exactly. And
but on other occasions, she just had to dump the eggs. But this was standard because it's orderly, like the other dinosaurs performed in orderly fashion.
Exactly. And in this case, apparently, rapidly rising mud played a role in the elevation of the eggs as they were laid.
And the rapidly rising mud, this needs to be pointed out, was not just a local context where the dinosaur could move over 20 feet and perform the feat that she was now in the process of performing, but as far as she could see in every direction, it was rising.
Exactly.
It was a global flood. And in that area, due to the gravitational attraction of the moon, everything was covered with a plain of this rising mud and water.
Which brings us to our next point, and I'm so glad you said that. If we head over here, I want to back up a little bit to the gentleman who really started this, and we'll start with Niagara Falls.
Okay.
People may not recognize the relevance between Niagara Falls and dinosaur eggs right off the bat. It has a historical relevance, first of all. We've talked about Charles Lyell repeatedly in previous programs. Yes. He was really the father of modern-day uniformitarian geology. Correct. And his goal was, as was revealed in his private writings, his goal was to discredit the history according to Moses, the Bible.
Yes.
And he would do so by making up his own history.
And he did.
Oh, did he ever. And it swept the world. Now, one of the places Charles Lyell got to study was Niagara Falls. He spent his life traveling around the globe, looking for evidence to back up the idea of long and slow geologic processes and refuting the global flood. In particular, everybody in his day knew the Bible said the earth was 6,000 years old.
Yes.
So when he went to Niagara Falls, as you can see, the falls are carving out a gorge.
I've been there, yes.
Okay, excellent. And the gorge, when he was there, he asked a geologist, he said, how fast is that gorge eroding? And the geologist said, well, I've been beelining it with this tree across the way. Oh, I'd probably say 3 feet per year. Quick guess. That's not what he wrote in his book. In fact, Charles Lyell did not do any good science with regards to this. He didn't go down and measure the erosion rates.
And he was not a scientist, by the way.
No, he was a lawyer.
Yes. Yes.
A good arguer.
So he had a point to make, and all the data had to support his point, whether or not it was relevant.
Exactly.
That's what a good attorney does.
That's right. That's right. Now, what he published was that it was eroding at 1 foot per year. He simply assumed the geologist was exaggerating, and so he published that it was 1 foot per year. The gorge is 35,000 feet long. Therefore, the gorge had to have taken 35,000 years to be formed. Therefore, the Earth cannot be 6,000 years old.
And that is an obvious context that anyone could study, and if his figures were right, he had a point.
Exactly. Now, were his figures correct? Last year, when I was in the United States on tour, I left Ohio, and I gave my good friend Ian Taylor a call from Ohio to see if he was going to be home and stop in for a visit. And he got quite excited. He said, I'm so glad you called. I was trying to get a hold of you because just today and that day in the paper, this drawing had been published. Now, this was apparently the first drawing ever made of Niagara Falls. I believe it was 1611, if I recall. Okay. It was Father Louis Hennepin. And so this was some 200 years before Charles Lyell ever showed up on the scene.